Good afternoon and welcome to Chats with Jamie. My name is Jamie Franklin and I'm the curator at the Bennington Museum. And today I'm very pleased to be welcoming Joe Churchirillo and Amy Anselmo, who are both involved with the North Bennington Outdoor Sculpture Show. This year, we're very pleased to have brought a portion of NBOSS, or the North Bennington Outdoor Sculpture Show, to the museum. Both of them have work in it, and they've been involved in the organization of it for a number of years. So I'm excited to bring them to us so that we can chat a little bit about NBOSS and learn more about it. So without any further ado, welcome Joe and Amy.
Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Amy. Hey, Joe. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Well, first, I think maybe for those who don't know about NBOSS, I know it started back in 1997. I'm wearing my NBOSS shirt, that says sculpture, hot dogs, and PBR since 1997. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to have the PBR and hot dogs yet this year because of pandemic-related restrictions. But can you tell us a little bit about the origins of NBOSS and how it kind of came to be as a community arts public engagement program?
It started with some students from Bennington College, and they wanted a spot so they could put their work out in front of people. At the time, a lot of them were doing steel sculpture or outdoor sculpture. And I'm pretty sure they viewed it as a place where they could experiment in front of the public. And then Anthony took it over.
Anthony Caperitz, who was a student at Bennington and is now the director of SAR, Salem Artworks, which is over in Salem, New York.
Exactly. And for a long time, I think you had to be living in Bennington to be in the show.
Yep.
And then there were a series of other curators. Stefan Folks took it over for a little bit. Amy did 1 year. Fred Brownstein took it over for a while. I feel like when I took it over, I have a little bit of a different point of view on it than they did. I've been trying to establish the show as more of a regional thing and connected to a lot of the other regional outdoor sculpture shows that are going on. And I feel like I put a lot of work into it to try and make it be a better show, to be a show that's more just about outdoor sculpture in general. And, that has fit perfectly into the whole thing with the pandemic, because it's one of the only things that can happen. It's a safe way of viewing art.
Yep.
So a lot of the outdoor sculpture shows didn't happen this year. A lot of the curators decided to not go through with it. And I'm really happy we did. And I think a lot of the sculptors are happy we did, opening or no opening.
Yeah, no, there's a great balance between, I think, looking roughly at the artists that participated this year, I think there's a pretty good rough breakdown. About half of the artists are local, and about half of the artists are coming from, the basic region, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, the larger kind of northeastern region. But so you get to both see people's work who you're familiar with, oftentimes new work, created specifically for the show, but also you get to see work by artists that you may not be familiar with because they're from away. So I think it's a really great kind of mix in that sense. How long have you been in charge of it as the curator, Joe?
This is my 8th year.
Your 8th year. Okay. And Amy, I know that you've been participating in it as an artist and, more recently, I think as kind of a PR and marketing person for it. How long have you been involved with it in some capacity or another?
Since I moved here in, I think, 2003, and okay. I actually had to curate it one of those years.
Yep.
That was pretty fun.
That's what happens with these sorts of, small town community events and organizations. They're important. And, I've always loved NBOSS, and I was so excited as we were starting to strategize at the museum around what to do in relationship to the pandemic and what sort of new things we could bring. I reached out to Joe and said, we'd love to show some more outdoor sculpture. And in fact, why don't we go ahead and show the first slide? And this is actually a sculpture that Joe created specifically. It was commissioned by Tony and Jackie Morrow, who are big supporters of the museum. And they commissioned Joe to create it for the museum. And we installed it up in our back meadow. We have a 10-acre campus at the museum. A lot of people don't know that or realize that. And we installed this back in the back meadow about 2 years ago. And it kind of served as the impetus for us to starting to think about, including more outdoor sculpture. So I invited Joe, and Joe reached out to a lot of the artists that were participating this year. And so in addition to, I don't know exactly how many sculptures or artists are over in North Bennington this year. I think it's close to 30, somewhere between 25 and 30. We have 20 contemporary sculptures on the ground at the museum this year, in addition to Joe's crow, which, Joe, can you tell us a little bit about this piece and kind of its origins?
Well, the Morrows asked me to do a crow up in the field up there above the museum. And, they're really wonderful to work with. And they gave me pretty much carte blanche to do what I wanted to do. So I wanted to make something that was, very permanent. So I decided to do a welded steel piece. And, I think the wingspan of this piece, just so that everybody kind of can tell, because photographs, how that is, I think it's 12 or 13 feet. So It gives an idea of the size of the piece. And
it's composed of found metal objects as well as, metal rod that you've welded together to create the form. It's really a beautiful piece in person. And so this was kind of the foundation of our idea of bringing more sculpture to allow people to engage more with our properties. So this year, both of you are also artists. So next slide is an image of Joe's piece that he brought for NBOSS at the museum, which is Joshua Tree #1. So this is one of your cast concrete sculptures. I also know you also do mechanical sculptures, which of course are generally more for indoor use, though we did have one of your fountains in our courtyard at one point. Can you tell us a little bit about these cast concrete pieces, or this piece in particular, Joe?
Well, this piece was in response to a visit to Joshua Tree National Park. A lot of my pieces are, about the environment, and they're also they're kind of a hybrid objects, which are partially man-made, about man-made things, about mechanical things, but also about how the intersection of nature and the mechanical world, the intersection between nature and man-made things. And this piece is not that different from that. So it's really about Joshua trees, but it's also very industrial at the same time.
And why don't we bring up the next slide, which is a piece that I believe was in one of the previous NBOSS exhibitions or shows. And this is a piece by you, Amy. I believe it was called Poet Shack or Poetry Shack. Can you tell us a little bit about this piece and its origins?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't just me. It was a huge community effort. There was about 60 people that sort of knit together for about 3 months in preparation for this piece. It was called the Poet Shack. It was a small 8 by 10 by 10 foot tall building that we made out of mostly found lumber. We took apart an old barn and borrowed Joe's truck and brought all the lumber to the NBOSS sculpture site. We built this cute little shack that was largely based on a project that I had seen in Martha's Vineyard, where they made tiny houses and auctioned them off for a cause. It was called Cabins for a Cause, and this one was very derivative of that project. And we had a friend named Carol Adonolfi, a poet, who was really amazing and who was undergoing stem cell treatment at the time. And so we wanted to make this cool little like writing shack as a way of both kind of like thinking about Carol, sending her good energy, and raising some money while she was kind of in that year of sequestration, which is kind of a lot like now in a weird way. And this was 7 years ago, actually, that we did this piece. And so the outside of it was covered with yarn, and then it also had these QR code squares, which at the time weren't quite as common. You had to have a separate app and everything, but if you beamed the QR code square with an app, you could listen to, see, or watch, or whatever, a piece of poetry in action. Some of them were old, like Frost, and some of them were new from many like local and international and young and current poets that participated. And then inside was another area where there was a desk and some writing instruments, and people would write poems and they would pop them up on the wall. It was a fun piece.
I loved being able to engage with it. And again, it brings up this subject of kind of community. You said, you brought the wood to the site of NBOSS, you used Joe's truck. I mean, that's the thing about a small community like Bennington and North Bennington, is our arts community is so interconnected, and that's one of the things I really love about this area. And I remember being able to go in there and writing on one of your vintage typewriters poetry and listen to people, and it's just a great way to bring people together around this idea of creativity and so yeah. And now why don't we show the next slide, which is the piece that you created for NBOSS at the museum this year, a piece that you called Psyche. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
It's called Psyche. It's named after a Greek story about a woman who grows butterfly wings. When you guys first did kind of a call out for people to make pieces of art to put on the fence as a way of showing hope, I very much thought of these winged murals that you see painted in a lot of cities. They're really popular, and they're very interactive, and they're very uplifting, and several different artists have done different projects with these winged murals. And then it's just a nice sort of gateway art experience for folks to like pose with a piece of art and be part of it. And again, it was kind of a community design in mind. Unfortunately didn't have as much help as I had with the Poetry Shack, but I did have 4 or 5 different young people that are staying with me here on the farm help me put the wings together and install them. And there was some definite, like lots of ideas being bounced around the community. My friend Sandra McSalmon, who lives there in North Bennington, was like, no, you must keep it all white. It must be stark and pure. So it was also community driven in smaller ways that could be done during COVID, but very much a response to COVID as like a way of, kind of saying we're going to get through this. We're hopefully going to reflect on the experience and maybe come out better versions of ourselves, deciding what's important to us, focusing on, the positive and the future, and maybe having a happier, healthier environment in the long run would be a nice goal as well.
That's great. I love the metaphor of the butterfly and the idea of metamorphosis and change. As this is a piece that people see on the gates of the museum now that we're reopened to the public at least 4 days a week, Friday through Monday, but they can come and see it at any point. And now, as we kind of conclude our conversation, I just wanted to ask, are there any specific projects, other than, the month of June that I know you, Amy, were working on Psyche, because I think you said it included something like 1,500 yards of hand-spun wool. Certainly took you, that was one of your large projects during the pandemic and this kind of moment of social unrest. Have either of you been working on other projects, or kind of how are you processing this as artists, this kind of unique moment that we're all living through?
Well, I've been incredibly busy. I'm working on a project that I got a grant from the state called Art and Infrastructure. And I was able to get some money from the village, from the fund in North Bennington. So I'm working on a kiosk and some signage for the village North Bennington here. And it's a giant project. I've been working on it for about a year, and it's close to being done. So when things started to hit with the pandemic in February, I just made sure that I had all the equipment and all the materials that I needed. And, I just have been staying very, very busy here. And plus, I am in some other outdoor sculpture shows as well, and I had to finish up those pieces. So You know, I've just been hanging out here, working at home pretty much all the time. And at first it was fantastic. I mean, at this point, you know, I'm looking for some other things, some other outlets. But I've been very busy and, you know, very happy to be busy with these projects.
Excellent. How about you, Amy?
Well, that big piece of art was really probably my oeuvre for the season. But I work for a sculpture park up here in Manchester, restoring sculptures and helping maintain it, and so that takes up a lot of my time, and I really enjoy that work. And I think I'm pretty committed to finding ways to connect people with all the different art and cultural experiences we do have right now. And so, getting out there to see art and be in nature and be safe, I think is really important. So, I just encourage folks to, find places that inspire them and go there. And I'm doing as much of that as I can too.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for all that you do for the community, for your own work, and for helping bring NBOSS both to North Bennington and to the museum this year. So again, thank you very much, and I'm sure I'll see you both around.
Thank you, Jamie. It's great to see you.
Yep.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, Jamie.